In our study of Sri Aurobindo's synthesis of yoga, we are at present at the core of the yoga itself, where he describes in the chapter titled Oneness, he says, the complete realization of unity is therefore the essence of the integral knowledge and of the integral yoga. And this realization of oneness and its practice in oneness in difference is the whole of the yoga. This is a capital statement defining the principle and the practice of yoga as the realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference. That is, in our consciousness, we realize the oneness of all, the oneness of the divine consciousness. And the scope of that he has described earlier from all of the extremes of the cosmic aspects or experiences. Each of these is seen to be only a part and an aspect of this single oneness. We live in this oneness. We make the vision of oneness real to our consciousness in all of our life. And also he says, we live, think, feel and will and act in the sense of this unity. So this realization of the oneness is one side, and the other side is the practice of oneness in difference. When you live in oneness, the oneness is not a monotone. The oneness contains in itself infinite possibilities. When we meet different things, objects, forces, energies, forms, we know them in our oneness, and yet there is the possibility of distinguishing them as part of a play of difference in the oneness. And to be able to exercise that power of differentiation, play with the difference without losing the oneness, that is, practice of oneness in difference. This is the whole of the yoga. To push the idea deep, we can play with an analogy. And of course, all analogies have limitations, but we draw the best that we can from this. If you enter the ocean as a fish, you may still experience water as separate from yourself. But if you enter the ocean as a drop of water, and your drop merges into the whole ocean, you are one with the totality of the water, that is the ocean. And yet, you can conceive of drops, yourself as a drop or other drops in the ocean. You can play between those drops and the forces and the interchange between these drops without losing the sense of oneness of the ocean and of the water. And to be able to exercise the power of that play of difference in oneness. To not be overwhelmed by the oneness, to reduce it to a monotone, but to know the finer nuance of the oneness which is multiplicity. That is the practice of oneness in difference. And to have the realization of oneness and the practice of oneness in difference, this is the whole of the yoga. How this is to be done, or the scope of this, is the theme of the next few paragraphs. In the immediate next paragraph, which we had read last time in some detail, the scope of this is elaborated. It is as if living in the oneness, Sri Aurobindo is unfolding the layers or nuances of this practice of oneness and difference. Beginning from a oneness which is complete, we draw out what are the most essential facets of the play of difference. He points out at first, Satchidananda is one in himself, in whatever status or whatever plane of existence. We have therefore to make that the basis of everything. But what is this everything? Of all effectuation, whether of consciousness or force or being, whether of knowledge or will or delight. And we saw this last time. But you will see, among these things which he has described, everything is covered. Then there are 3 sentences which follow, which now build on this through 3 layers. The first sentence which we have read before, last time, begins like this. We have, as we have seen, to live in the consciousness of the Absolute, transcendent, and of the Absolute manifested in all relations. And then he follows with a series of others: personal, impersonal, silence, word, etc. But the starting phrase of this sentence is, we have to live in the consciousness of this. The next sentence, which also we had seen, we have to find him, knowing all, sanctioning all, governing all, containing, upholding and informing all as the Purusha, and at the same time executing all knowledge, will, formation as Prakriti. But here the first phrase of this sentence is, we have to find him like this. So first it was, we have to live in this consciousness which is able to hold all these extremes or facets. Then we have to find him in these 3 different ways. And the next sentence, which we are going to dwell upon much more today, we have to see him as one existence, and then consciousness, and then delight, etc. He goes through the 7 principles of creation. First was to live in a consciousness of oneness, in which all aspects are only aspects of the oneness. Next, we have to find him as knowing all, sanctioning all, governing all. And third, we have to see him in these 7 planes, through these 7 principles. Now, with this, we have the base of how the oneness moves to play with difference without losing oneness. In the first step, it was the poise of consciousness, where he says we have to realize oneness. And the scope of that was live in the consciousness of the Absolute, which is at the same time transcendent and at the same time manifested in all relations. You live in the oneness, in the impersonal, and manifest all personalities. We have to live in the consciousness which is beyond qualities and yet rich in infinite qualities. You live in a consciousness of silence, out of which the eternal word creates. And you live in a consciousness of divine calm and peace, possessing itself in infinite joy and activity. And all of this is the status of the consciousness in which you live, which is the realization of the oneness. And from this you move to the play of the oneness. And in this, the very first step is to see the oneness objectively. Living within subjectively in the oneness, you now turn to experience the oneness objectively. And what do you see as the oneness? Not just a flat monotone, but this very rich oneness. But much more important, and this is the correction we can make in our relationship with the whole universe and beyond, it is a conscious being that we meet. When we look at the universe, it is a habit of our nature, of our mind, to see it as something abstract and impersonal. Oh, there are so many galaxies, and there are super galaxies and planets and many wonderful things floating in an empty space. And it is all seen as something very impersonal. Our concept of universality is like a flat, bland extension, impersonal. But what Sri Aurobindo is speaking of when he looks at the Satchidananda, he says, Satchidananda is one in himself, in whatever status or whatever plane of existence, himself. Because Satchidananda is not just an existence which is bland, it is utterly conscious, blissful existence. And being conscious, it is being. And so when we turn to see and experience the oneness objectively, what do we meet in the oneness outside us? Conscious being, that is Satchidananda, the divine, the Lord. And so we have to find Him. How? In three ways in which He relates to the world. Knowing all, sanctioning all, governing all. And we saw these last time as the three aspects of Brahman, Purusha and Ishvara. And the way he relates from that poise to the entirety of the cosmos, containing, upholding, informing. So as the Lord, as Ishvara, He contains, because all is His domain. You will recall Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the first verse of the Isha Upanishad, which goes, all this is for the habitation of the Lord. Isha Vasyam idam sarvam. And Sri Aurobindo says, what is the purpose of habitation? Why do you want to inhabit a house? Why do you want to inhabit clothes? Why do you want to inhabit a body and a mind? What's the purpose of habitation? Why does the soul at all choose to enter all this? And he says the purpose of habitation is possession and enjoyment. And straight away it changes our vision of the whole universe. The divine manifests and inhabits the universe to possess and to enjoy the universe. And so when He holds this whole containing all things, it is as Lord who possesses and enjoys everything. Ultimately, it is He the only enjoyer. All our enjoyment, if at all we may call it that, is mixed, partial, confused, and unstable, ineffective. It is precarious. We can lose it easily because we are not really inhabiting fully. We are inhabiting a piece, this body which is I, not that which is not I. And therefore I fear that which I don't inhabit and all the rest which follows, eventually ending with suffering and division and conflict. But He inhabits entirely, possesses fully, enjoys completely. And so our enjoyment is at best like a reflection of a reflection of a reflection, because we have lost our identity with Him, and through the very layers of separation something reflects, and a little bit of the glimmer that we experience, we say, I am enjoying life. Except it doesn't last, because the moment you have enjoyed a little bit, you reach the limit of that bit, the rest you are unable to enjoy, it stops. And rather than saying, I am fed up, I am bored, the solution would be to extend the domain of consciousness, of inhabitation. And as you begin to inhabit entirely in the oneness, then you share and enjoy in His oneness. But the first relation of the Lord as master, possessor, is containing everything, and as the Purusha, supporting, so upholding everything, in everything, His presence supports from within. The flower can exist because in the very essence of the flower, it is the divine consciousness that exists. Because it exists, flower exists. Because it is conscious, flower can become conscious. Because it enjoys, flower can express delight and beauty and love. And it is this poise of supporting from within everything. The mother, in a different context, explains that the divine grace operates on two levels. There is the universal action, in which it is at the very basis of everything, inside each atom, in every particle, in every object, in everything. From below, from within, as if from inside, it supports and upholds. And she says, if even for a fraction of a moment it did not do that, everything would simply vanish, collapse. It is a statement which is very scientific. The approach of modern physics says the same thing. There is a humongous ocean of energy, so enormous as to be infinite and going beyond our calculations. Our mind being finite or able to handle only finites, we have to reduce infinity to something which is manageable. And so we have to go through a process in quantum physics where we eliminate the highs and the lows and keep a narrow band of energy so that we end up with something finite. But even that is humongous. A tiny cubic centimeter of empty space has enough energy to evaporate all the oceans of the earth instantly. And it's right here, doing what? Upholding, supporting. And if even for a moment it was not, nothing could be. All is held and supported from within by that, including ourselves. When we feel weak, when we feel incapable, when we feel hopeless, it is only an illusion, a deception of the surface appearance. The reality is deep within us, is that same power which creates the whole universe, upholding. And if we could, instead of chasing for support outside, turn inward to find its support within, even just a fraction of it, a glimpse of it, would be enough to take care of everything. So that's his second poise, in which we see him everywhere in all things, upholding. And third, remember, possession and enjoyment does not stop with just the basis. It must enter every tiniest detail. It's not enough to be flower. It must experience every tiny facet of the experience of flower and its relation with all things. And so, informing, filling the form entirely from within as it plays and enjoys in the universe. And this is the aspect of the oneness spread out into the multiplicity, the totality of Brahman. So when we turn from our poise of the oneness experienced subjectively to enjoy the oneness now around us objectively, we have to see him. We have to find him, knowing all, sanctioning all, governing all, containing, upholding and informing all as the Purusha, and at the same time executing all knowledge, will and formation as Prakriti, the whole movement of the play of his energy, executing his will, is also him in the play as her. And all this is the divine being, the oneness that we see objectified around us. And the next sentence, the third sentence, which is actually made up of 7 long phrases listing the 7 principles of manifestation, he begins with, we have to see him. So the first was live in the consciousness of the oneness. Second, find him in this triple poise. And third, see him as, and he splits it now into 7 principles. The 7 principles also are 7 planes of consciousness which form the entire cosmos. But these 7 principles are principles which are essential for any creation. And we will dwell upon each of these as we read the sentence. But we must experience this, or at least understand this, on 3 levels. First, as the idea of what the principle does. Existence, as a principle, what does it do? So we have the Sat, sheer existence, consciousness, the Chit. The third is the Ananda, delight. The fourth principle is the supermind. And then we have mind, life and matter. All 7 principles are essential if you have to have a cosmos, stable with multiple relations within it. So we'll see what each of the principles contributes in this. Each of the principles, being a principle, is actually present everywhere across the cosmos. Without its active presence everywhere, well, cosmos would not be. And yet, because each is a principle in itself, there are spaces in the cosmos in which a principle dominates. Spaces where the second principle dominates, spaces where the third principle dominates, and so on. So practically we tend to view the cosmos in terms of these bands where the principles dominate. We call them planes. And so we have the plane of Sat, plane of Chit, plane of Ananda, plane of supermind, plane of mind, plane of life, plane of matter. In reality, all of these are within each of them. It is only for the purpose of some practical differentiation that we tend to separate them. Of course, because the mind is inherently divisive, it must understand only by separating them and then rejoining them. So we separate them, observe their powers or functions, and then join them again and see how they work in everything. So when we study these 7, actually there will be 8 sentences, but the 7 principles, we will view them first in terms of how the principle operates. Second, understand how each of these is a world in itself, a plane, a way of experiencing the cosmos. And then third, we'll see how that as a plane or principle operates inside everything across the cosmos. So first, he says, we have to see him as one existence, because it's the oneness in its principle of existence. So what is that? What does it look like when he exists? Being gathered in itself. Being with a capital B, because it is conscious being, it is the Lord himself existing. Being gathered in itself and being displayed in all existences. So if you focus only on the aspect of sheer existence, the divine exists. We do not look at consciousness, we do not look at delight, we do not look at any of the other aspects or principles, sheer existence. And this, our mind has to perceive in 2 ways. Gathered in itself and displayed in all existences. So when the divine exists, its sheer existence simply is. In the biblical tradition, when Moses meets the Lord as the burning bush, who are you? He asks, I am. I am what I am. Sat, sheer existence. There is nothing else you can say of it. And that turns knowing itself utterly, but also knowing itself in all things into the multiplicity. So as a plane in itself, or as a power or principle in itself, it is this poise of knowing, being in itself, gathered. No multiplicity, it is gathered into the oneness. And the second aspect in the manifestation, it is the same being that exists. No more gathered, but pouring out, displayed in all existences. Everything exists because that is. In the image that the mind has, one can conceive of sheer, essential, as if substance, which then becomes deployed to become the substance of all cosmos. The transition from this to that would be described as the Big Bang. And science has to say, because it lives only inside the domain of form, it must say, well, form appeared, so there must be a time when it appeared. There must be a point from where it appeared. But that's not true. It is at the same time contained in itself, concentrated, gathered, and at the same time it is deployed in all things. The universe has always been. There was no beginning, there will be no end. But in between, in its being, it may go through cycles where it draws more inward or pours more outward, and that's all. But this being is also everywhere displayed in all existences. When you look at the flower, it is that being which is here, covered up perhaps in its display, but still it is expressing itself. Being gathered in itself and being displayed in all existences. And we have to see him as one existence, that is this being. The second is split into two, consciousness and force. And it is the aspect of we will see how that reflects subsequently in the domain of matter. But for now, we have to see him as one consciousness concentrated in the unity of its existence, extended in universal nature, and many-centered in innumerable beings. So one consciousness, there is only one, there are not two, there is no division of consciousness, just as there was one existence without division. But that one consciousness again holds a double poise, concentrated in the unity of its existence, where it dwells only on that unity, and the other where it extends in universal nature and appears as many centers. In how many? Innumerable beings. There has to be no end. In the very nature of the universe, there can be no limit. If you conceive of a limit with your mind, you put a border, you can ask what is after the border. And so obviously there being something after, that also is part of the universe. Outside your capacity perhaps, but it's still part of the universe. So in the very nature of things, everything is infinite. And if consciousness appears in focal points, many centers, it has to be innumerable. The innumerability sometimes may be potential, sometimes may be expressed more, but it is always innumerable. And this is so deep in the very design of things, as we've seen before. You can take any object, take a stick of 1 meter, piece of wood or metal, and start dividing it. How many divisions can you make? Well, between any two divisions you can find many more. Between any of those you can find many more. And you can go on dividing unendingly. And if you divide unendingly, well, how many pieces do you have? Infinity. There's a very interesting theorem of mathematics. I'm drifting a little bit into what Sri Aurobindo has referred to as the logic of the infinite. We have the mathematics of the finite, which our mind is used to, and there's a logic of the finite. But Sri Aurobindo refers to the divine playing with the logic and the mathematics of the infinite. We were drifting a little bit into that, but there's actually something you can play with and the mind can perceive in the field of maths. So if you take a stick like this, break it up into, let's say, 20 pieces, and then reassemble them, what will you get? Obviously, the same stick. But if you break it up into an infinity of pieces, and then rejoin them, depending on how you rejoin them, it can be a meter, it can be 2 meters, it can be 10 meters, it can be 1 billion meters. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing, depending on how you rejoin. Somehow the moment infinity steps in, all of our conventional experiences of reality jump out of the window. You can take an apple, cut it up into an infinity of pieces, and then rejoin it, and it will be as big as the earth. No problem. It's pure mathematics. One can explain how it works, but you'll get the sense of it if you simply take 1 meter stick and a 1 centimeter stick and map it. Draw a line from the top of one to the top of the other, and from the bottom of one to the bottom of the other. You will get as if 2 rays which join somewhere, and draw a series of rays passing through the first stick and touching the second stick. Okay? For each point in the small stick, there is a unique point in the large stick. For each point in the large stick, there is a unique point on the small stick. They are identical when you map them in infinity. Amazing, isn't it? You can visually see it. Yes, it's obvious. And this is the nature of the reality. Everything is infinite. And even the consciousness holding itself in oneness is like this point. And then deploying itself in innumerable centers is like these rays going out. Everywhere in the universe, everywhere there is life. Not always fully physically manifest. Sometimes on a more subtle, or becoming more densified, more concretized, more formed, but it's everywhere because the universe is infinity of consciousness pouring out. So we have to see him as one consciousness concentrated in the unity of its existence, extended in universal nature, and many-centered in innumerable beings. It is his consciousness that takes up the center within each flower, within the stem that supports the flower, within the tree that blooms in so many flowers, within the mountain that supports so many trees, and so on unendingly. It is the same one consciousness taking different poises, equally in us, equally in every other being, sentient or not. Equally in the very person that you may hate or love, dislike or like. And when you begin to consciously see him in each of these centers of consciousness, and that becomes more vivid, more intense, that becomes the real, then all these other relationships that you have, like, dislike, love and hate, they kind of pale into insignificance. They look like playthings of children. You know, when little children play and they have a little fight and they say, now today I am no more your friend, I am your enemy. And as an adult, as a parent, you watch and say, oh yeah, that's little children, they are playing with dolls. It changes, it has no reality, it has nothing lasting. And it's something like that that one begins to see all these complex human relations that we have built. We are playing with difference, but very superficially. One can play with difference on a more deep level. But then you do not have these facets of hate or dislike. Everything is variations of color, variations of beauty, variations of delight in the oneness. And so, in this second aspect, he asks us to see him as one consciousness. What was earlier one existence is also one consciousness. And then the other facet of consciousness is whenever you are conscious, the awareness is a power. It is a power which allows you to change what you are aware of. When you observe your thoughts are racing, you are conscious of your thoughts, you can choose to restrain or change them or turn their direction. When you are not conscious of your thoughts, well, you can't change it. Consciousness is power of consciousness. Awareness is power to change. Because the very nature of awareness allows you that. And so it is an aspect of consciousness itself that is now described. One force. You have to see him as one force. There's only one force. There are no two forces. But one force static in its repose of self-gathered consciousness and dynamic in its activity of extended consciousness. So it is one force which comes to rest, and the poise of rest is static, gathered in itself, in the consciousness, and then the same one force deploying itself, becoming dynamic in activity of extended consciousness. Now, if you see in the three we have so far touched, there is a layering. First, he asked us to see one existence, one being. Then, in the next one, he said, one consciousness concentrated in the unity of all existences. So, inside the existence, you become aware of the consciousness. In the next one, he says, one force static in its repose of self-gathered consciousness. Inside the consciousness, you experience this force. You become aware of it. And just as existence had this double side, one indrawn, the other deployed, in the same way consciousness had this double side, one indrawn and the other in the play, multiplying. And in the same way the force also is seen in both ways. In the consciousness which is self-gathered, the force is static. In the consciousness which is extended, the force is dynamic. You see how he is building through layers. And it's as if he is constructing the cosmos from its foundation. The first principle being sheer existence. In that existence, we discover one consciousness. In the unity of existences, it is concentrated. In the many beings, multiplicity, it is many-centered. And then in that consciousness now, we see one force. When the consciousness is self-gathered, the force also is at rest. When the consciousness moves and pours out, the force also is in activity. So the sequence of constructing the cosmos is first the foundation, existence. The existence becomes aware of itself, is conscious that it exists, and in that consciousness discovers the power to be, the force to modify its consciousness. I am conscious that I exist and I can be like this, I can be like that, I can be like that. And since there is no time, what can you be? I can be this, unendingly. Since there is no time, you are all these simultaneously. Simultaneously. It's very important to recognize. The divine is not this and then that and then the other. It is simultaneously everything. It is simultaneously all existence, it is simultaneously all consciousness, it is simultaneously all force pouring in and through that consciousness. One more thing is required. When it is simultaneously everything, you could call it chaos. In the Greek tradition, the mystic tradition of the Greek, they looked upon chaos not in the casual way we use the word today. Today we say, oh, this is chaotic, meaning everything is thrown in disharmony, in confusion. But chaos with a capital C was for them the vision of the divine in which all possibilities are held. But no clear organization, no clear structure, everything unendingly. It is as if the womb from which anything could burst out. Anything can happen. If inside a box you have a very fixed, structured, ordered something, what will come out of the box? Fixed, structured, ordered, predictable thing. If inside the box everything is pell-mell, no structure, no order, what will come out of it? Miracle. We can't know. It will be a leap, a jump, something unimaginable, unanticipatable. And so the womb of chaos is the birthplace of surprise, magic, miracle. Anything can happen. But when that same infinite possibility, which is simultaneous in the divine consciousness, when the divine looks at itself and all this infinite possibility, it brings forth a power that arranges everything. And when it arranges everything, you have the ordered cosmos. So cosmos is what emerges from chaos, or chaos is the womb from which cosmos emerges. They are, so to say, two sides of each other. When you step out of that ordered power of organization, you have all infinite possibility. Right now, instantly an elephant can appear or disappear, or change itself into a dragon and fly off as a bee. No problem. Everything is there, potential. In one of the very beautiful verses of Uma Sahasram, which incidentally was inspired under guidance of Ramana Maharshi by Ganapati Muni, and it was finished in a certain number of days in extraordinary metrical and poetic content with deep spiritual, occult and mystic knowledge. Well, in one of those beautiful verses in Uma Sahasram is 1,000 names of the Divine Mother. Sahasra is 1,000 of Uma, of the Divine Mother. And in one of the verses, he is extolling her power of creation. And he says, your creative power, literally the womb, the idea of the womb from which anything can be born, your creative power is such that from a blade of grass you can bring out an intense fire. And from the fire you can radiate intense cold. And the idea of stating it in this way is that opposites can emerge. And there's no compulsion that binds the divine freedom in its play. In fact, if you look at the nature of evolution, Sri Aurobindo points out, each step of evolution is a reversal of the previous. It is miraculous. Out of dead matter, life emerges, which is the very opposite of dead matter. It is a miracle. It is out of the womb of the impossible it comes. And out of unconscious life, conscious awareness emerges. Again, a miracle. And out of conscious mind, what emerges? Self, oneness. Out of division, out of an instrument of division, the oneness of the self, the divine himself reveals. Each step is like as if a reversal of the previous. Magic. And the only way you can explain it is that what has emerged was hiding latent in the source. Life was hiding inside dead matter. There was no such thing as dead matter. Mind was hiding inside life. There was no such thing as unconscious life. And the same way, the divine, the self, the supermind is hiding inside mind. And there's no such thing as fragmented, limited, finite mind. It's an appearance, it is concealment. All of the things emerging were already hidden inside, and so they can emerge. But the emergence is a magic, a miracle, an impossible thing. And it's as if nature, for nature, this is the joy. What's the use of doing something staid and predictable? To break out of it and do something miraculous, that's the delight, isn't it? So we are seeing here this movement of the emergence, and in the one existence which can deploy itself to become extended, displayed as all existences, there is a one consciousness able also to play out in many centers, and within that one force at rest, moving now into kinetic activity. And so far what is created has all possibilities. It is still chaos. Everything is simultaneous and completely real and existent to the divine consciousness. Next step comes one delight, blissfully aware of its featureless infinity and blissfully aware of all features and force and forms as itself. So we have to see him as one delight. Now these are literally, you may use the word, four bodies or four faces, forms of the Lord. You saw him as one existent, you saw him as one consciousness, you saw him as one force. and now you see him as one delight. It is not one being having delight. It is not one being experiencing delight. It is one being that is all delight. And so he says, one delight, again taking a double poise, in the oneness of its focus, in the singularity of its consciousness, and the poise of rest of its force. It is one delight, blissfully aware of its featureless infinity. Because there is no form, there is no deployment, it is in its immersed oneness, but the oneness is infinite delight. And at the same time, blissfully aware of all feature and force and forms. So just as one existence moved with many consciousness, many force, the bliss also plays in all features and force and forms as itself, not inhabiting, as itself. The flower is the divine as bliss, flower. The table is the divine as bliss, table. The tree is the divine as bliss, tree. Each one of us is the divine as bliss, person. We do not participate in our surface consciousness in this reality. But deep within us, this is what we are. And because we are that, its realization is its experience in our revealed form of personality is inevitable. How long it takes doesn't matter. The process of unfoldment and discovery of this bliss is itself part of the delight of the play. So, we know him as, we have to see him as one delight, blissfully aware of its featureless infinity and blissfully aware of all feature and force and forms as itself. Again, so far we are still holding infinite possibility, the womb of chaos. The next step is what creates the order of cosmos. And so, next is the supramental principle. One creative knowledge and governing will, supramental, originative and determinative of all minds, lives and bodies. So this is something which needs some elaboration because there are many simultaneous rich ideas here. So first it is knowledge and will. It knows all the possibilities in this chaos, the womb of chaos, and it wills in this womb of chaos to give birth to put out in form, to deploy in expression, in objective manifestation. So there is awareness, the knowledge, and then there is the will, the power, the force to execute. But it is creative knowledge and governing will. So then let's play with this nuance. Why he says creative knowledge? Because it is knowledge which knows everything, but if you just knew everything, well, there's no creativity. You are what you are, you know what you know. The creativity is how you play with what you know, how you arrange, how you deploy, what you do with what you know. And in the creativity, the whole idea of creativity is to bring out something which could not have been conceived. You see, if I take a computer, throw in it all the words from the dictionary and the rules of grammar, and make the computer churn out sentences, you wouldn't call it creative. Because it's just rearranging what is already there, nothing new. Something is creative when what came out was not there. Or it was latent perhaps, secret, but it was not seen. It has burst out as a surprise. Oh, how did you think of that? How did you create that? And so in the power of the supermind, it's not just the knowledge of everything that exists, but the ability to create out of it something which could not have been conceived. So from the womb of chaos, where everything is possible, the power to conceive of the miracle that will come out. Unexpected. And then the second power of the supermind is the will. And the will he describes as governing will. What it wills governs. Now what that means is, we have to understand more easily by the opposite. Our human will. I will this flower to change color and become blue. I will. It doesn't happen. Right? Because my will has to act on something which is not I. I will for this work to be finished by this time, and I can try to do it, even if finally I have to do. Somewhere it slips because I do not have enough energy, my hand cannot move fast enough, my skill is not sufficiently developed. I need to act through media, which is not I, for a result which is dependent on many things which are not I. Our experience of will is not a governing will, it is a struggling will. Struggling against other forces and other wills, and therefore inevitably failing. Even when you say, I achieved this successfully, it's not the way I had thought it would be. Somehow, something, somewhere there's a flaw, some limitation. It can never be perfect. And even if it did achieve, I make my definition narrow enough that I can do it. Even if it does achieve, it is not perfect. Something lacks. I wish I could have done it better. The second time I will do it even better. If I had to live my whole life all over again, I would do it differently, better somehow, right? So there's always something lacking in the will, because it has to deal with things not itself and against all the rest. But for the divine will, what happens is, remember, it is one existence, which is one consciousness, which is one force, which is one bliss, and one will. And so where is there other? There is no other. And so what it wills, it simply flows freely, effortlessly, smoothly. There is no straining. Because in the human consciousness, even if I achieve what I did, I have to push against so much. In fact, your ability to actualize in life something is dependent on the power of your being able to push against all opposition and resistance, which of course eventually you will fail. But for the divine, there's nothing else, it is only itself. And as it flows, it is effortless, smooth, perfect. Nothing is out of place because there's nothing opposing it. It is what it chooses to be, perfectly. And if the flower has a flaw, it is because in the movement of the divine will, it chooses to play at these variations. And if on your computer you can make a perfectly geometric flower, it's because it's possible to be perfect in any limitation, in any form. But in the play, it is much more useful to be varied rather than being bound to narrow limits. And so the divine pours out. What? Creative knowledge and governing will. Everything it does is governed by will only, nothing else. There is no other opposition. So the supramental consciousness has this feature. It knows all things and draws out of them the infinite possibilities through its governing will. Knowledge will. But the nature of the supermind is that the knowledge is the will. That's another limitation of our human mind. I know, but I am unable to do. This famous phrase, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I know I shouldn't eat too much sweet, but I cannot help it. My willpower is too weak right now. Or, now I'm inspired, I have to do, my will rushes through, but I don't know what I'm doing. And by the time I'm done, oh my God, I wish I'd thought about it before. The knowledge and the will are separate functions, separate operations, inevitably not aligned therefore. Inevitably some slippage or some lack in them. In the supermind, the awareness is the power to be. What I am, what I choose to become, in the very act of knowing, I am. Something of this we glimpse in the spontaneous movement of a dancer. A dancer expresses a feeling, an experience. We are speaking of the master dancers. She moves and the thing is done. If you try to do it, imitating the form, it's somehow kludgy, it is not spontaneous. What you feel, your body flows to follow. And that gives you a glimpse of the spontaneity of the knowledge, will, unification. But it comes after long training and practice and within very narrow bands of expression. Similarly, in the Japanese tradition, there is this art of drawing in a single stroke. So they will hold the brush, and there's a particular way of holding that it is not your mind which makes the brush go with its thought. The brush is held, it is dipped in the paint and on the paper, it moves in a single swipe and completes an image or a word or some pattern. And the true masters, you will see, they are unmoved. The brush as if moves by itself and it's done. And in the print you can feel that was one single flawless movement. That feeling again, you see, in everything where the human being reaches a peak, there is this merging of knowledge will. Because that's the ideal that the supermind holds. And every time we tend to approach that, that's when we exceed ourselves. But these are, let's say, early preparations inviting the full play of the supermind, which would have that spontaneously in everything at each moment. Mother observed how increasingly, because the supermind is manifested but still operating from behind the veil, because it's working in the world right now, increasingly things will tend to happen spontaneously, effortlessly. That's one of the characteristics of its working. You need a particular thing, and even without your needing to say or act, it happens. And all of us have experienced these things. They happen at times. You are, as if we use the phrase now, in the zone. When I'm in the zone, it just happens. When I'm somehow out of sync, everything is messed up, blocked up, jagged, banging into each other, not flowing smoothly. And you shift. It's a tiny correction and you're in the zone. And this is a skill which we have to develop. And you will notice the character of the zone is you do not think. Your mind is effectively silent. It is not the initiating power. Something else is initiating. It is only a receiver or a spontaneous instrument. Something higher above mind kicks in. And therefore he says, one creative knowledge and governing will, supramental, not mental, beyond mind. Now the word supramental, because it has become a kind of a catchword, when you read in Sri Aurobindo again and again, everything is supramental, supermind, one tends to conceive of it as something distant and far and abstract. But if you think of the way he uses the word, in the way he formulates the word itself, supramental, it is from mind that you go beyond mind, through mind that you have to go to that which is greater. And so our power of mind is given to us for the purpose of taking us to that which is still greater, which is, as we said earlier, involved in the mind. It is already concealed as a power, the same way as mind was concealed in life and life was concealed in matter. So already in our mind is the latent supramental faculty operative. Now I'm going to give a few examples here of how that is. And when we study these examples and when we begin to observe the way our mind functions, you will suddenly begin to glimpse the supermind which is already there. And then you realize it's not so far away, it is right here in the behind the veil working of your intelligence. If you, for example, let's take an example of a puzzle. You take two pieces, a puzzle of 1,000 pieces. If you've ever done something even which is 30 or 40 pieces, you can see how the first two pieces that you take often are unconnected. What do you do with it? Well, you throw it back. You take another two, you throw it back. As long as you're picking two pieces where you do not see connection, you throw it back. You'll just spend the rest of your life picking and throwing. Somewhere when you look at the two pieces, something kicks in that says, perhaps this is this and perhaps that is that. Some relation is sensed. And you place it in what would be the frame of the picture at those suggested locations. What in you perceived where it might be? And sometimes when you observe this, there's something very precise that says, oh, this is definitely such. What in you knows it? That is what is guiding your active intelligence. Now, if you observe the way your mind works with the pieces, you pick another piece and now you start arranging, you are already seeing a possible image, although you don't know what it is. And that perception of what the possible image is not a picture you have formed, and yet you sense the relations. That sensing is happening at a level which is behind your active mind. If it was not, your mind would not function. Very simply. I'll give another example. If I make a statement that if A leads to B and B leads to C, then A leads to C. Right? Nobody says wrong. Why? Try to explain it. Try to explain to somebody who says, no, it doesn't make sense. You say A leads to B, then B leads to C. Obviously A leads to C, right? Obviously. There's nothing more you can say. You can keep repeating these phrases. Somewhere you say, it's obvious. What in you sees it as obvious? That power of seeing is not mental, it is behind. It is the way supermind sees. But now looking through as if a window at a fragment. When supermind sees everything, everything is obvious, down to the tiniest detail and richly revealed. That a glimpse of that you see in this simple statement. But if I ask you to prove it, how do you prove? You don't. That's how it is. Isn't it? 1 + 1 is equal to 2. Prove it. It's obvious. Right? The part which is seeing the obviousness is that power, which is not a mental thought out, but something operating behind functions of mind which already inherently knows. Because this is there and because it holds inherently actually all knowledge, the functioning mind recognizes, this is what it is, this is how I should arrange, this is how I should act. All of the operations of the intellect would not be possible if there was not this layer behind which already knew. And this is the supermind, latent, secret working inside your mind's operation. Where is your attention in this working? On the operation, on the thinking effort. But if you stop that thinking effort and shift your attention to this part that feels obviously, knows and sees obviously, you're making your first step to an intuitive mind. And so Sri Aurobindo's training program for awakening the intuitive mind has as its first step the ability to silence the mind and hold it silent at will for as long as you need. The moment you're able to do this, you have the capacity to shift to this poise from where you see things, it's obvious. If you don't have that ability to silence the mind, you can never shift out from the active part to the silent, seeing part. And that's your first step. And the other steps which follow. So here what we're seeing is the power which sees all this functioning is not the thinking movement of mind's working, but this essential supra-mental, above mind, transcending mind, but with all capacities of the mind included. Awareness. So he describes this as one creative knowledge and governing will, supramental. And then, from there, what does it do? When it holds all this knowledge, is able to create out of it the surprise, and is able to flow effortlessly in its in its governing will. What does it actually do then with it? It originates. It originates everything. Nothing can exist if it does not have its origination in this organizing power of the divine. That's why it is one of the essential principles of cosmos. From chaos, the originating power is what organizes to make. From chaos, it organizes to make cosmos. It looks at this and puts it in relation with all else. Instantly. It does not have to go like our intellect. Okay, if I have to arrange this, what about this thread, that link, that you have to go serially one by one. But in the supramental awareness, because it holds all in its awareness, this is known effortlessly in its right relation with everything, and everything in its right relation with everything. Now let me push this to the extreme so we appreciate what this knowledge means. You take a grain of sand. If you move it from here to here, what happens in the universe? You remember the statement of the Buddha, when I move my finger, the stars change. From pure physics, when the grain of sand moves from here to here, its relationship with the planet Jupiter has changed. Its gravitational force on Jupiter has been modified. Okay? Jupiter has moved slightly to accommodate this shift of gravity. Slightly, however minutely, but slightly. The Sun has shifted slightly to accommodate this shift. Now extend this to all the galaxies in the universe. When this grain of sand moves from here to here, the entire universe shifts to accommodate this one grain of sand. Okay? Now imagine at this very moment, all the billions of grains of sand which are moving, and the entire universe shifting itself to accommodate each of those shifting grains of sand, and shifting drops of water of the ocean, and shifting ripples of electricity in your brain, and everything is shifting in perfect alignment with everything else. If you were to reduce it to a physical calculation, this minute shift of gravitational field and its effect on everything else would be perfectly balanced at each moment according to your mathematical formula. What holds everything in balance? In knowledge, and wields this shift in its governing will, supramental, it is this power. And it is because it holds everything in this perfect alignment and perfect arrangement that we have perfect cosmos. If in the act of moving this grain of sand, everything else did not instantly accommodate to adjust for this shift, you would not have cosmos. The very definition of cosmos, the order which you see, is this deep interconnection and the constant adjustment, which is held by this conscious being of delight, enjoying this play within himself. Now you see the complexity of this awareness, of this knowledge, of the play of this force, and the richness of the delight of this play. And it's one consciousness, one force, one delight, one creative power that plays in this infinitely complex multiplicity. So, one creative knowledge and governing will, supramental, originative, and determinative of everything. It originates, it determines. Now, any form that exists in the world, let's say even the flower, could not exist if there was not a bundle of energy flowing, repeating the flow to keep the appearance of a form, right? That flow which is repeated and held in this rhythm is also undergoing modifications constantly. But there is an idea behind which holds the overall concept of the flow and its modification to keep it reasonably static, so that we can recognize it as a form and say, this is flower. So there is an idea governing force of energy which creates the appearance of form. That idea which holds it and which holds in constancy is a supramental idea. And to that Sri Aurobindo gives the name real idea. It is similar to Plato's concept of archetypes, but something still deeper than archetypes. There's some essential conception of flower which holds all the variations of flower play, but also holds this specific flower play and its whole journey from bud to bloom to fading and to manure. And it already holds it before even the form is expressed. That thing which holds all this play is what Sri Aurobindo calls real idea, because unlike mental idea, which is just an image, this is the thing itself that it expresses. And so real. And so the supramental is originative as a real idea of everything, including real idea of cosmos as well as everything inside it. All flows from it. Nothing exists without its origination and its determination. Because nothing happens which it has not chosen freely, fully, without exception. Now here this gives you already a very strange picture of the universe. It's almost as if everything is deeply interconnected and deeply bound and interlocked. Fate, locking in like a machine. At least that's how a mind would first see it. And this is the error, of course, that we make. In the text of the Isha Upanishad, there is this phrase which says something like this, that the one divine in this way, in this conception, describing four statuses: the seer, the thinker, and the one who becomes everywhere spontaneously, has determined all things from the very beginning of existence. If you think about it in very superficial terms, you would say, so the divine has fixed everything, and so the whole world is like a machine running like a clockwork. There's a similar phrase, I believe, also in the Quran, which of course is interpreted by the surface mind to say, so everything is fixed, nothing else. No, that's not it. That's the reduction your mind has given. In the supramental consciousness, what is held is the rich play of relations and all possibilities of all relations. So this grain of sand which moved from here to here could have moved from here to there, or there, or there, or there, or could have exploded, could have been melted, could have been heated, could have been evaporated, anything. And each of those possibilities is held, and each of the relations that it would have with everything else in the universe adjusting to it, all of these are simultaneously held in the supermind. So what is held in perfect organization, perfect alignment, is the full play of free will, not fixity. And so when everything has been predetermined in the relationships of the unfolding play, but not in the nature of the play or the outcome of the play, where the predetermination gives you the freedom to play also. Inherent to your consciousness is the freedom which is also predetermined in that sense, and all the possibilities that come with it. So it is one conscious being, utterly conscious, organizing itself in a certain way, so to say, for the purpose of the play, willing, choosing, flowing, but allowing full play of freedom within the framework it has set for itself to be cosmos. So originative and determinative of everything. So here he says, of all minds, lives and bodies. Now in this particular case, he brings our attention to mind, life and body. For a reason. He could have said all things. All things would include mind, life and body also. But he's bothered to say mind, life and body. Because there's a reason as it unfolds and holds all these things together. In mind, in life, and in body, we see three different kinds of working out of the supramental knowledge and will. And this prepares us for the next three principles which he describes. What is the working in the mind? That is what is described in the next. What is the working in life force? That's next. And then in matter, the last. So, briefly before we move, it is supermind that organizes. Sat Chit Ananda, that are the very substance of being in the oneness and the multiplicity. Supermind organizes, holding both the oneness and the multiplicity of the play, and deploys. It is therefore the one principle which knows oneness, it knows multiplicity, and it is not deceived by appearances, because all appearances are its movement, freely put out. All knowledge, all power, omniscience, omnipotence, and all freedom are held here in this principle. Next, now we come to the fourth principle. From supermind, remember, it was oneness, focusing through supermind, and now on multiplicity. So in the operations of the mind, we see the first loss of oneness, fragmentation, and then that will be extended all the way into matter. But as if a lens which diffuses the light of the oneness, one mind containing all mental beings and constituting all their mental activities. This also is the divine. Divine as thinking mind, as cosmic mind. But what's the nature of mind? Unlike supermind, which was living in oneness, this is working in pieces. This is working in finitenesses. But the finitenesses it deals with are infinite. So infinity is never lost. It just goes back to the background while your focus is on the finite appearances. So one cosmic mind is what we're seeing, containing all mental beings. So it is something which is as if holding, embracing from outside, and then also constituting all their mental activities. Now when he says all mental beings, it's not just we as human beings, it's not just the apes and the other animals which have more developed minds. It's not even the unthinking creatures. I was interested to see this morning, they found bees have sufficiently developed intelligence to recognize the concept of zero, which is considered to be a very abstract concept. But they have it, crudely, but. So it shows mind is actually penetrating all the way down, including in the worm, but not so overt. Not even all this. The concept, when he says all mental beings, includes not only all these, it includes all the beings which we do not see, including beings of the vital worlds and the mental worlds and all of the universe. Now when you begin to look at the universe like this, all mental beings, where is there not a mental being? Everywhere that there is mind awareness, which is everywhere, there is also formations of beings, less stable, more unstable. That's all. Just as everywhere there is matter, there is form. You cannot separate form from matter. Even so-called empty space has form. If you look deep enough, your form is hidden, that's all. You're unable to see, it's a limitation of your sight. But the telescopes can see things which you do not see. Microscopes or infrared cameras will see stuff. Everywhere that there is matter, there is form. Everywhere that there is mind, there is conscious thinking beings. And it will be one of the explorations of humanity as we go out further, that we will see even beings which are made of what to us would be unsubstantial, like plasma, rarefied plasma gas, but which hold a life and conscious thinking beings. And I'm saying this not just as an imagination, but as something which is actually being perceived by people going out of their bodies or perceiving through occult and other means. It was a very interesting outcome when the US military was conducting experiments with what they call remote viewing, which is really a projection of consciousness. And being projection of consciousness, it perceives things of consciousness easily, but things of form less easily. And so, once in a while they would do experiments. They would throw in something random and see what it led them to. And one of the numbers which they pointed took them to a vision of what they saw as a being that was almost like, I don't remember now materiality, but it was almost the size of a planet, which was entirely conscious, and it was like a child trying to discover itself and understand the universe. And they had all these other extraterrestrial beings trying to understand it and communicate with it. Now imagine a military remote viewer suddenly being made to see something like that, and they said, wow, this is really far out. But this is nothing compared to what actually exists everywhere in the universe. There is substance of mind and therefore consciousness and living, thinking, presence. So everywhere there are all minds, all mental activities, all mental beings everywhere. Even in planets where we say this is too hot or too cold, even on the surface of the sun, you'll have beings but on a mental consciousness, in a mental body, not bound to physical limitations. And it would be fun to go there. If you could go in your mental body in out-of-body experience, wouldn't you go on the hottest part of Venus or the coldest part of Pluto? And you would be a mental being right there. So one mind containing all mental beings and constituting all their mental activities. Now already in the image you see the oneness has receded. Multiplicity is the dominant theme. And next, one life active in all living beings and generative of their vital activities. Now you see, we're going in a reverse order. Wherever there is mind, there is active life generating their activities. It's not life evolving to mind, it's mind containing life inside it. And then from there, one more step, one substance constituting all forms and objects, as the visible and sensible mold in which mind and life manifest. And there's more which we'll see later. Now again, with all life, we have to see not just the visible life forms, but all the invisible life forms. If you walk into a garden, especially if it's a beautiful space, if you walk into an empty patch of the garden, you have just disturbed hundreds of little beings who run away in the presence of human beings. Little dwarfs, gnomes, fairies, whatever name or form you may give to them. Some of them almost formless, like bundles of energy playing about. And when a human being walks in, they find a vibration so agitated, so disturbed, so aggressive. They can't stand it. It's too disturbing and too intense, and they run away. And only somebody in whom there is deep stillness, radiating deep stillness. It's not enough that you feel it in yourself, radiating deep stillness. Then they feel comfortable, and then bit by bit they may build trust and approach you and come and even play with you. But otherwise they just run away. Everywhere. If you dig into the soil, under the soil, near the roots, there are little beings, life beings, often like bundles of light, little pockets of energy. And what's their job? Nourishing the roots, pushing forward the life processes. And where these beings are well organized, undisturbed, loved and supported, you will see life thriving. Where you create disturbance that drives them away, the life processes wither and die. Because they depend on this working of life force. And so again, when he says everywhere, one life active in all living beings and generative of their vital activities, literally you see an ocean flowing and all the worlds being the activities of life force. Where is it? Everywhere, no exceptions. In some cases more organized, more stable, but everywhere there is life. Wherever there is mind awareness, which is everywhere, there is life activity. And all this taking place in one substance, constituting all forms and objects as the visible and sensible mold in which mind and life manifest and act. So now here the last layer, when he brings the substance, what does the substance do? Gives form, objectifies, provides a mold which is visible and sensible, meaning you can sense it. That means if you went up a few levels before, let's play of life, play of mind, where is the mold? Can you sense it? The little dwarf or fairy that we spoke of near the flower, I don't see it, I don't sense it. Even the mold that it has is fluid. There have been interesting narrations of the relation people have had with these beings. In one narration, which I had read long ago, the person used to see spontaneously in nature these beings, and they would appear in the classical, typical picture of little fairies that you saw in comic books of little children. And so he said, but is it true that's how you look? And they said, no. But if we came in our natural form, you wouldn't recognize us. So I said, how do you get this form? And they said, we pick it out of your mind. And it's actually that easy. In the subtle worlds, in the nature of life and mind, form is not so rigid. That is why in dream state, when you wander in life and mind worlds, often you see things in strange forms, which correspond to your expectation of things. And if at that moment you modify your expectation, the form instantly changes. Your expectation shifts forms because the thing reflects in form what your mind is providing as a mold. The molds are fluid. What is static, what is constant is the quality of mind, thought and energy, depending on the level at which you are at. But when you come to the physical world and the material consciousness, what is constant is form. And the content of the form changes. So you see a human being, the body has not changed, but the thoughts inside are jumping all over the place. The emotions are jumping all over the place. You do not see. You go into the mental world, the life force is the same, the form is changing. You see, each plane, each principle puts forward its dominant character upon the rest of the principles. So the moment you enter the material world and material substance, it's providing like clay, the housing, inside which life and mind can enter and play. Or they can step out of it. Then you say, the house is dead. Body died. No, body didn't die. Life and mind dropped out of it or left it. Body collapsed. Like clothes. I'm wearing the clothes. If my body was invisible, you would see a shirt moving around. And if I dropped the clothes, you would see the clothes collapse and you'll say, oh, the cloth died. No, the cloth is still cloth. I left it. But it's the same thing which happens with the life and mind entering the mold provided by the substance of matter. So, one substance constituting all forms and objects as the visible and sensible mold in which mind and life manifest and act. Otherwise they are still there everywhere, not manifest in visible and sensible mold and form. Now this principle, again, remember all principles operate everywhere. The principle of substance also extends across other worlds. That is why in those worlds you will see forms. But the forms are fluid because that is not the first principle. You enter the life world, you will see beautiful creatures, extraordinary colors, strange shapes, expressive of their life character. So the principle of substance which gives form is there, but it is secondary principle. The first principle is life, so the form is fluid. Similarly, you enter the domain of thought. You have a thought idea, you have a thought form that it takes. In your mind you conceive of something, an outcome. It actually emerges in the occult sight. One would see a bundle of thought form emerging. And depending on your occult sight, you would see it as bright, clear, clearly defined, structured, or fluid, nebulous, cloud-like, unformed, undeveloped, from a mind which is not capable of a clear thought. You would see it literally as a form, but that form is also again fluid. Two people looking at it might see it in different ways, which is why in the dream state also forms shift easily. A tiger becomes a cat, or a cat becomes a tiger, depending on how you relate to the energy that is in it. So here is this principle of formation, and where when you enter the domain of that principle, which is matter, you have rigid form. When you move to other levels, you still have form but more fluid. In the world of life, life is all powerful. In the world of matter, life becomes weak, subdued, dependent on the encasing form. So if in my biology now, my sodium and potassium levels drop, life force doesn't have the basis to operate in its current organization. So suddenly I feel weak. I push up sodium and potassium levels, now I feel fresh and energetic. But that's only because the life force entering the human body has organized its basis on matter with this particular combination of things. The same life force entering, let's say, a jellyfish, dependent on a very different balance of minerals and vitamins, might thrive in the same environment which to me would be poisonous. Or I would thrive in an environment that to it would be poisonous. What determines that relationship? Organized habit developed over a long period, what we call evolution, is nothing but life energy working in matter to develop a certain balance of relationship until it's got itself working now stably in matter. It can push matter, matter can push back, but we have got a rhythm and a balance working. In principle, this means life can organize itself under any circumstance, anywhere, or potentially adapt itself to any circumstance, anywhere, given enough time to adjust its balance. Now we see this in human beings often. People adapted to high altitudes. It's amazing to see, and this is quite common in the hilly regions in the Himalayas, a woman of 60 takes a whole pile of bricks, 5, 6 bricks on her head, and scampers up the hill. She's part of the crew that's building the house. She's 60 years old, scampering up with this pile. And you coming from the plains, you're huffing and puffing after climbing a few steps. Why? The body has adapted to low oxygen levels, low air pressure, and your body has not. You stay there for a few days, for a few weeks, for a few months, maybe you get the same level of adaptation. You come back to the plains, the air is stuffy, too heavy, too dense, and again you adapt. Potentially, life force can adapt to anything. Potentially. What is matter providing? What is this seventh principle providing? The visible and sensible mold in which mind and life manifest and act. And then he gives something extraordinary. He connects this all the way to the top, across the 7 planes. Just as, he says, just as one pure existence is that ether in which all conscious force and delight exist, unified, and find themselves variously. Just as in the Sat, in the pure existence, consciousness and force were playing. In the same way here, in substance, life and mind are entering and playing. You see the correlation. This is extremely important. First, it gives you a picture of the cosmos, which is almost like a mirror image. What was Sat, sheer existence, has become in the divided consciousness, substance, allowing for many forms. Where up there it was one existence. Consciousness and force have organized here as life, mind. And their working here is what you see in a mirror reflection. And in between the mirror reflection is the supermind, which takes the upper 3 and reflects them below in division, in a divided consciousness. But here also you see one mind, one life, one substance, reflecting the unity up there, but playing in division entirely. And the relationship of these three below is similar to the relationship of those three above. Now, not only is it a beautiful image, but it suggests something extraordinary. If this is that, it means that must reveal itself in this. This is that, but in divided appearance. Substance which conceals, not existence which supports. Substance binds life and matter, concealing life and matter. Whereas up there, existence is revealing consciousness and force. Here it is the reverse, binding, hiding. But life and mind are struggling to reveal themselves through substance. And to the extent that they're able to reveal, you have what we call evolution. Dead matter was when life and mind were totally bound. When life pushed out, then you had living matter. When mind crept out through life's help, you had thinking living matter. But what if this substance would begin to more and more yield, allowing them to reveal themselves freely? What would happen? You would grow more and more in the image of that. Or if you take this to its culmination, eventually in form, in finite body, life and mind, Satchidananda would reveal itself. If you went all the way to its limit. Or you can say the same thing, the same image tells you this is Satchidananda concealed in appearance of division and pushing itself out as one divine conscious being, the entire universe, matter, life, mind, as one being, concealed, fragmented, hidden, revealing itself, becoming conscious and emerging as divinity in form, in material, visible, objectivized, tangible, multiple forms. And it gives you a very different picture of what this whole game is about. It means also that Satchidananda is then secretly within all things. If it is secretly within all things, nothing can ever prevent its emergence. After all, it is the originator of all things. When it decides to reveal itself, nothing can prevent it. So the certainty of the evolutionary fulfillment of the divine life is there in this very recognition of what things are. That's why Sri Aurobindo says something, he says, the supermind in the very nature of things is inevitable. In the very nature, because that's the design of the cosmos, you cannot be otherwise. Inevitable. It's only a question of when and how. And how it chooses to organize its life as it reveals itself. Just as life force could choose to organize matter in different ways to create jellyfish here and monkey there or a totally different ET somewhere else, it can play. Just as mind could organize your life in many different ways, look at different cultures and different standards of life and values. In the same way, supermind organizing itself might organize its expression in many different ways. That is left to its freedom. And it will be a very rich, much more rich freedom than even what life and mind could create. Much more beautiful because spontaneously perfect and harmonious. But the inevitability of it is seen when you look at the cosmos in this way. Everything is right here. If you enter the worlds of life and mind, say going out of your body, in dream state or conscious out of body experience, you cannot have the experience of matter. Substance, yes, but fluid substance. When you re-enter the body consciousness, you can have the experience of matter and life and mind. In terms of richness of experience, which offers you greater potential? being in the body. Isn't it? But here your mind and life are constrained, they are bound. But you have access to all three. What you can do with this here is far greater in possibility than you can do up there. If you shed the body and go into the vital and mental worlds, between lifetimes, you are free to play around there. You can't do too much. You can do stuff, but only that much in that domain, at that level of consciousness. But when you reincarnate, you have access potentially to developing all these levels. So if you want to experience evolution, you need to reincarnate. Complete evolution, that is. You can have partial evolution in the domain where you live, but to have a complete development of all possibilities, you need to reincarnate in physical body. And through this, you would be able to go all the way to the highest plane of the Satchidananda and bridge them all the way down to matter. The sevenfold cord of being, Sri Aurobindo calls it. It's a whole chapter in the Life Divine. The sevenfold cord of being. Now think of it as just as an image of a harp of 7 strings. Chord of being, a suggestion of the harmonies. If you choose to live in the mental or vital world, or even to wander off in the spiritual, abandoning these, fed up, I will get into nirvana and live in some ecstatic state. You will play with those chords, but you will miss these chords. But when you enter matter and from here recover the full spectrum, and in the full awakening of the divine life, you can play the entire spectrum of the harp without limits. That is the most complete life. And that would be the divine life. Living in a spiritual domain separately would not be a divine life. Living in the material body with the full spectrum of awareness, all integrated in one continuum, that would be the divine life and the divine harmony and the divine melody. Up there, he says, all conscious force and delight exist unified and find themselves variously in the pure existence. And so therefore, eventually in the revealed divine life, in the domain of form, life and mind and supermind and Satchidananda will play and find themselves variously here in form. And that would be the definition of divine life. And in this way we come back to our original description of yoga, remember? This realization of oneness and this practice of oneness in difference is the whole of the yoga. Now you're seeing it from the other poise. When there is the full revealed divinity, the oneness is revealed and the play of difference takes place in the domain of form, with the full spectrum of 7 chords. That is the whole of the yoga. See, we started with that sentence looking at it from a certain perspective, and we complete with that sentence looking at it from a very different perspective. And this is the sense of this entire paragraph that we have been reading. To live in that consciousness, to find Him in that triple aspect, and then finally to see Him in these 7 levels. That is the sense of the completeness of this play of oneness in difference. So just to enjoy the full impact of this sentence, we will go through all the 8 phrases, 8 descriptions of the planes in one go, and just soak in the full import of it. Remember, it is the Lord, the one divine consciousness that we are seeing. We have to see Him as one existence, being gathered in itself and being displayed in all existences. As one consciousness, concentrated in the unity of its existence, extended in universal nature and many-centered in innumerable beings. One force, static in its repose of self-gathered consciousness and dynamic in its activity of extended consciousness. One delight, blissfully aware of its featureless infinity, and blissfully aware of all feature and force and forms as itself. One creative knowledge and governing will, supramental, originative and determinative of all minds, lives and bodies. One mind containing all mental beings and constituting all their mental activities. One life, active in all living beings and generative of all their vital activities. One substance, constituting all forms and objects as the visible and sensible mold in which mind and life manifest and act. Just as one pure existence is that ether in which all conscious force and delight exist, unified, and find themselves variously. So, we have to see him as all these. Why? In the last sentence he says, for these are the 7 principles of the manifest being of Satchidananda. When Satchidananda manifests as one being, it is these 7 principles by which he manifests. And so the whole cosmos we see as one being, one Satchidananda. With this now we begin to articulate in our life, we have to begin to recognize also the distinction between the higher and the lower working of this full spectrum. How we are to distinguish between these two in the overall consciousness of oneness? What is the practical sense we make of it? That is the theme of the next paragraph, which we will maybe just read the first sentence to understand where he will go with this. The integral yoga of knowledge has to recognize the double nature of this manifestation. For there is the higher nature of Satchidananda in which he is found, and the lower nature of mind, life and body in which he is veiled. And to reconcile and unite the two in the oneness of the illumined realization. We have not to leave them separate so that we live a sort of double life, spiritual within and above, mental and material in our active and earthly living. We have to review and remold the lower living in the light, force and joy of the higher reality. So the whole thing now is bridging these two, which we will take up next Friday. For now we can pause here and take up any comments or questions. Or we can remain meditative in this vision, seeing him in this way. Just as a general announcement for those who are interested, next Thursday is the centenary of Sri M.P. Pandit, who was the mother's secretary and one of the extraordinary disciples of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. And in order to observe that special occasion, we have a program on the 13th, a kind of a sharing where people who have known him will express something of what they felt or things they experienced. This will be at Hotel Atithi on 13th June at 9:30 in the morning, and it will be followed by lunch. And on 14th, which is the centenary, we have a program of a morning prayer at 6 o'clock at his residence. And we will be showing a video of some of his talks both on 13th evening and 14th evening at 6:30. So you're all invited. There's a little note here with the schedule. You may freely take of it if you wish to, when you leave. We can remain in this meditation on the theme. Yes. We can remain in this meditation on the theme of the divine Satchidananda manifesting in and through and as the seven principles of manifest being, and hold that for the rest of the evening. Sri Aurobindo gives the vision of the Lord and the most complete way of relating to His multiplicity in His unity. As many as you like. On well.